In this lesson, we'll begin our discussion of muscle tissue. We'll introduce muscle tissue by looking at some of the major properties and function of muscle tissue. Then we'll finish up this lesson by looking at how muscle tissue is organized. We're going to focus predominantly though on skeletal muscle. So it turns out, if you remember from previous lessons, that muscle is one of the primary tissues. Just to review, we had epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and then nervous tissue. Our focus for this lesson, these next couple lessons, are going to be on muscle tissue. Now, there are three different types of muscle tissue. The muscle tissue that's on our frame is known as skeletal muscle. The muscle tissue that makes up our heart is cardiac muscle, and then the muscle tissue that makes up our hollow organs and our blood vessels is known as smooth muscle. The majority of this chapter, where we're talking about muscle tissue, will be on skeletal muscle. At the very end, the last two lessons, I will do cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. They're covered in a little bit more detail again in anatomy and physiology too. So again, we're going to focus on skeletal muscle. Just a little bit more introductory comments. Muscle tissue, as far as the cells that are in muscle tissue, they are specialized for contraction, right? So that's a unique property of these cells compared to other cells in the body. And our skeletal muscles, when they contract, they move the body by pulling on our frame. They pull on the bones that make up our skeletal system. Cardiac and smooth muscle also control movements inside the body, right? You probably know when our heart beats, right? When our heart contracts, it's moving the blood. Smooth muscle, as an example, could move digestive materials. Let's say you had a sandwich a little while ago, breakfast or a sandwich, and the food went into your stomach. It's the smooth muscle that starts to contract and moves the food around in your stomach, and then ultimately the smooth muscle moves it into your small intestine, and so on and so on. In our blood vessels, the smooth muscle actually controls the movement of the blood, so that when certain areas need blood, the smooth muscle helps to direct that blood to those areas. So this is an important slide. Let's take a look at the properties of muscle tissue. Number one, muscle tissue is excitable, right? We call this excitability. This is the ability of a muscle to receive some type of stimulus and then respond to it. An example would be a nerve which innervates the muscle. When that nerve fires, it causes the muscle to contract. That's the second property. This is known as contractility. That's the ability of the muscle to shorten once it has been stimulated, right? That shortening is what's going to produce the movement. Another property is the fact that muscles can be stretched without doing damage. Again, within normal limits. We're not talking about if you do a sports injury or you overstretch a muscle as part of your work, that type of thing. We're talking about just normally the muscle can be stretched without being damaged. That is known as extensibility. Finally, elasticity. This is the ability of the muscle to go back to its original shape and length after it has contracted, right? When you contract it, it doesn't then stay short. It has the ability to go back to its original length. Okay, so those are the four important properties. We call them excitability, contractility, extensibility, and then elasticity. These next two slides are also important. These are the functions of skeletal muscle. So we kind of mentioned this before. One of the major functions of skeletal muscle is to produce movement, right? Our muscles are attached to our bones, and then when the muscles contract, it pulls on the bones and it allows us to move, right? Get out of bed, get up, get dressed, go to work, go to school, that type of thing. Without these muscles, we would just be laying in bed, right? We wouldn't go anywhere. But when we're not moving, let's say maybe you're sitting at your desk right now, or you're sitting at on your couch or bed, and you're kind of just sitting upright, and you're really not moving, our muscles are still contracting to maintain your posture and your body position. So even though you're not moving, what's keeping you upright is the muscle contraction. Muscles also, skeletal muscles also support soft tissues. Some good examples would be this. Our abdominal wall in the front of your abdomen is keeping all of your intestines in and your reproductive organs, that type of thing, as well as the muscles on the pelvic floor, right? They're keeping our organs from falling out through the pelvis, right? So these are what we would consider supporting soft tissues, but they're made up of skeletal muscle. We also see that some skeletal muscles, they're more circular in shape. They're going to enclose openings of the digestive system as well as the urinary system. We refer to these as sphincters. And these basically are under conscious control. So they give us voluntary control of elimination. Or let's say someone has to go to the bathroom and the bathroom is not nearby. These sphincters can be contracted to prevent elimination until the time is appropriate. Another function of skeletal muscle is it actually helps to maintain body temperature. We'll learn in subsequent lessons when skeletal muscle contracts, it releases energy in the form of heat. And you know this already because when you go to work out in the gym, let's say you go, run on the treadmill or you go run outside or you do some weightlifting, when you do your workout, you get hot, and that's from the muscle contraction releasing the heat. Finally, guys, the last function is muscle can act as a form of a nutrient. Not that we want this to happen, but during times when maybe a certain amino acid levels are low, and or even sugar levels, and we need energy, we can break down muscle for energy. So it's something that we really don't want to do, but it has that ability. So I gave here an example of starvation. Okay, so these are the important functions. Again, produce movement. When we're not moving, maintaining posture and body position, acting as a supporting tissue. Again, the good examples are the abdominal wall in the front of your abdomen and the pelvic floor. They can act as sphincters, maintain body heat or produce heat. And then again, we don't really want this one, but we can break down muscle to use it as a source of energy. Okay, we'll finish up this lesson by taking a look at how skeletal muscles are organized. We're going to see that skeletal muscles contain skeletal muscle tissue. These are the muscle cells. We call them muscle fibers. I am not going to talk about them in this lesson. This is just a whole separate lesson. This is actually a big topic. So that's going to be the next lesson that you watch or listen to. What we are going to focus on is the connective tissue associated with muscle. We'll take and then look at the blood supply as well as the nerve supply. All right, so skeletal muscles do contain muscle fibers, connective tissue, blood vessels, and nerves. But again, in this lesson, I'm just going to focus on these three. The next lesson that comes up will be on the actual muscle tissue, the muscle fibers. We'll look at their anatomy and physiology. So let's take a look at the three types of connective tissue. There is the epimysium, the perimysium, and the endomysium. These are connective tissue wrappings associated with the muscle. Let's take a look. So the first one is the epimysium. And just so you know, some people say epimysium, perimysium. That's fine, I guess. I usually pronounce it mysium. That was the way I taught. It's the way I understand it to be pronounced. But I do hear people saying epimysium. Basically, this is a layer of collagen fibers that surround the entire muscle, the whole muscle. If we were doing dissection, say we remove the skin of whatever we were dissecting and now we see the muscle and you touch the muscle, you would be touching the epimysium that is around the muscle. We've actually talked about this before, but we didn't call it epimysium. In the tissues chapter, we refer to this as the deep fascia, and this fascia separates the muscle from surrounding tissues. So today in this lesson, we're giving this deep fascia a name. We're calling it the epimysium. The epimysium. Let's take a look. So here's a picture where this gentleman here, they took his forearm muscles here and we enlarged it like this, and now they sliced it. This blue plane of glass here shows that we're slicing the muscle in half, and now we're looking at it here. So ignore all this in the middle. I'm going to explain this on the next couple slides. This yellow collagen, all this connective tissue around the muscle is known as the epimysium. So, right, this is all collagen surrounding the entire muscle. Here, they actually sliced into the muscle here and pulled it back, so you can see again this connective tissue right here where my cursor is. And that would be the epimysium. Here's from another textbook just to kind of give you an idea. So we can see here's the bone, here's the tendon attaching the muscle to the bone, but the epimysium here, they kind of peeled it away here, and it would be this outer layer right where my cursor is. That would be the epimysium. Just want to give you another perspective how other books do it. Now, the next connective tissue associated with the muscle fiber is called the perimysium. So let me go back a minute to this picture. Notice here, guys, when we look inside the muscle, we have these bundles, these little compartments here. Here's a bundle here, right? Here's a bundle here. Each one of these bundles is referred to as a fascicle. And within the fascicle, we have these little circles here. These are the actual muscle cells, the muscle fibers that are running the length of the muscle. This is what I'm going to talk about in our next lesson. These fascicles contain anywhere from 10 to 100 muscle fibers in it. So this kind of bluish tissue here that surrounds the fascicle, this is connective tissue known as the perimysium, right? And that's the next connective tissue you want to look at. These are this is connective tissue that surrounds muscle fiber bundles that are known as fascicles. If you just want to add, the fascicle contains anywhere from 10 to 100 muscle fibers, right? The fascicle contains anywhere from 10 to 100 muscle fibers. Now, the perimysium is made up of collagen, just like the epimysium, but it also has some elastic fibers, which gives it stretch. It contains blood vessels, so this is a way that our blood vessels get into the muscle, as well as nerves, right? So this is an important tissue because it's just not connective tissue, it also has blood vessels and nerves in it. Let's take a look. So what they did here now is they took one of these bundles, known as a fascicle, and they pulled it out, right? So we kind of pulled out the whole fascicle, and now we sliced the fascicle in half, and now we're looking at it. So again, this kind of purplish, bluish connective tissue around the fascicle is known as the perimysium. So all of this is the perimysium, and you can see the little dots in there would kind of represent blood vessels and nerves. Okay, so that's the perimysium. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually pull out one of these muscle cells. So this right here is a muscle cell, or we also call it a muscle fiber. That's going to have its own connective tissue wrapping. So what they're showing you here is in black, they kind of outlined one muscle cell. And on our next slide, we're going to pull that out. Okay, so again, what did we do so far? The epimysium, I'll show you right here, surrounds the entire muscle. Then the perimysium, like actually I'll show you over here, right here, this bluish purplish, that right there is the perimysium. Right here we see it blown up. That surrounds the fascicle. And here's from another book. Again, so what they did here, same thing, they kind of pulled out one of the fascicles here. So here's the whole bundle. And again, this little tissue right here sticking out, and then all of this around, right where my cursor is, would be the perimysium. And here they blew it up. Again, here would be the perimysium right here. All of that, and then again here's the whole fascicle. Again, just another perspective from a different book. Finally, now, so if we pull out one of these muscle fibers, even going back to this slide, right? This is a little bit simpler. We pull out the muscle fiber, right? This is one muscle cell. That's going to be surrounded by something known as the endomysium. endomysium, right? Endo, you probably know, means within. So this is going to be the deeper one. And this surrounds each individual muscle cell. And just be aware, because I use them interchangeably, we can call muscle cells muscle fibers, right? They're like long strands that run the length of the muscle. Now, this endomysium contains capillary networks, so that means it has a really good blood supply, again, to bring blood to the muscle cell. And muscle cells, we're going to see, need a lot of oxygen, they need a lot of glucose, that type of thing, fatty acids to function. Right, so these capillary networks are important. But the endomysium also contains a unique cell that we haven't seen before. It's a stem cell that helps to repair a muscle when it's been damaged. This is known as the myosatellite cell. And the last thing that's inside the endomysium are some nerve fibers, right? Some nerve. Again, we need to have nerve to stimulate the muscle fiber, right? It's going to stimulate the muscle fiber. So, what do we do here? Here they pulled out one muscle cell, they sliced it in half. That's that blue like plane of glass there, and now we're enlarging it. So watch this, guys. Not these little red dots. These are proteins inside the muscle cell, but all of this tissue here is the endomysium. All of this. And then you can see these red circles, these are blood vessels in the endomysium. Here's that specialized cell that helps, it's like a stem cell that helps with tissue repair called the myosatellite cell. Just to show you, here's the nucleus of the muscle fiber. It's on the edge over here. It's not in the middle where we normally expect to see a nucleus. And notice there's more than one nucleus. I'll talk about this in a subsequent lesson. These red dots are just proteins inside the muscle cell. Sometimes students confuse these as other cells. They're not. These are just proteins inside the muscle cell. Okay, so this is known as the endomysium, right? It's connective tissue with myosatellite cells. It has uh, capillaries for blood supply, and this little yellow dot right here represents nervous tissue as a way of bringing blood and nerve supply to the actual muscle cells. Okay, so again, here's the three levels of connective tissue: epimysium surrounding the entire muscle, perimysium surrounding the fascicle, endomysium surrounding the individual muscle cell. Let's go back to that other textbook. So again, you can see here, epimysium is this one out here surrounding the entire muscle. Perimysium is this one here surrounding the fascicle. Now, when we take out the muscle fiber, this connective tissue right here would be the endomysium. Right, and this is just showing the proteins inside the muscle fiber. Again, I'm going to talk about that on a separate lesson. Okay, so let's take a look now. These three connective tissues, they can actually extend outside of the muscle to form our tendon. So let's read this statement here. The collagen fibers of the epimysium, as well as the peri and the endomysium, they come together at the ends of the muscle where there's no contractile elements anymore. It's just going to be these connective tissues, and they form a tendon. Now, the tendon is usually kind of like a bundle. If you felt your biceps tendon in your elbow, you would feel like a tube. The tendon would feel like a tube. But they can also form something known as an aponeurosis, which is a broad, flat tendon. All right, so either way, whether it's a bundle or a sheet-like tendon known as an aponeurosis, the tendon is going to contain the epi, the peri, and the endomysium, and it's the function of the tendon now to attach the muscle to the bone. Right, that's an important function. Our tendon attaches the muscle to the bone. So I like this picture here, even though we don't really see the endomysium and the perimysium, but you can see the epimysium and here, all of this in here, this tendon would be a combination of epi, peri, and endomysium that have extended from beyond the actual muscle belly, the muscle tissue, and that would be a tendon right over here. And that's kind of more of a tube-like tendon. Okay. The last thing I want to talk to you about, this will be the last slide for this lesson, is that our skeletal muscles, in addition to having a good connective tissue, they have a really good blood supply also. And that's important. Our skeletal muscles have an extensive vascular network. And the reason for that, guys, is our skeletal muscles need plenty of oxygen and nutrients, things like glucose, fatty acids, right? We use them to produce energy to make the muscle contract. Now, when muscles contract, they produce metabolic waste. That has to be flushed out. And one of the ones you may know is called like lactic acid. Right? When our muscles produce lactic acid, we got to get rid of that. So that lactic acid goes into the bloodstream where the liver will process it, believe it or not, back into sugar. So the blood supply brings blood to the muscle so that it gets plenty of oxygen and nutrients, but at the same time, it will remove the waste products. And then finally, our skeletal muscle also has a good nerve supply. Right? Innervation, by the way, just means nerve supply. And the reason for that is this: our skeletal muscles will not contract unless they are told by the nervous system to contract. Right? So these contract only when stimulated by the central nervous system. If you want to jot down, the central nervous system basically means the brain and the spinal cord. Now, we often call skeletal muscles voluntary muscle because, again, if you want to contract it, your brain can tell the muscle to contract. If you don't want to contract it, you can tell your brain can tell your muscle not to contract, that type of thing. One of the muscles that's actually a skeletal muscle that we don't really think about as being voluntary, even though it really is the diaphragm. This is actually controlled on a subconscious level, right? You don't have to tell yourself to breathe 16 times a minute because that's what the diaphragm does. So this kind of just works on a subconscious level. All right, so that concludes this lesson and this portion here on the organization of the skeletal muscles. Again, we introduced the concept of a skeletal muscle fiber, which is going to be the topic of our next lesson. And then we looked at the connective tissue associated with muscle. We took a look at the blood supply as well as the nerve supply.